local guy. Many of you probably know him. He's almost everywhere around in the Cypress area. I don't care where you go, you kind of bump into this next speaker. He is Mr. Tom Oliverson, and he's from District 130. And so he is next to speak to us.
Yay!
Thank you. Got a toy. Well, it's great to be back with you. It was a long session, as it often is. I will tell you that for me personally, this was my hardest session because the legislation that I willingly took on was monumental. I've never had a bill book that was actually a 5-inch 3-ring binder before, but I was introduced to that concept, and it was quite a fight. I don't know how many of you tuned in or were watching the whole debate about the gender mutilation bill, Senate Bill 14. But the Democrats gave it everything they had to try to stop that bill. That was the hill they wanted to die on, and I just wouldn't let them. Took 18 hostile amendments and shot them all down one after another. I kept my word to the party, I kept my word to you, I kept my word to the Senate. The bill came over, we didn't weaken it, we only strengthened it. It was actually stronger when it left the House than when it came over from the Senate. And I think now we have legislation, what I'm being told by kind of groups outside. I was talking with Darren Keyes from Alliance Defending Freedom today, and he was telling me that the way that we presented the bill in the Texas House and the way that we fought for it on the House floor, which includes a lot of you filling the gallery, by the way, thank you very much, and give yourselves all around an applause. That literally has become the model now. People are going to other states and they're saying, this is how you do this. This is how you run a committee hearing. This is how you chair the hearing on this. This is how you lay out the bill. This is how you defend the bill. This is how you deal with hostile amendments. So it was a long, hard fight. There were a lot of days where I thought to myself, is it ever going to be done? Am I going to ever get to lay out my bill? Because we had some points of order and stuff like that to work through, but we did. So got that done. That wasn't the only thing that I took on. I think it'll be in the presentation, but how many of you know about ESG? Hopefully everybody in here knows about ESG at this point, right? So Texas is now one of the, as far as I know, is the only state in the union that prohibits the use of ESG in insurance. And that was Senate Bill 833, first of its kind. Every insurance company, I had people from BlackRock Financial to Switzerland Reinsurance Company, Zurich, coming into my office and begging me not to pass this bill. And I just said, sorry, too bad. You know, we want you as insurance companies to be focused on actuarially sound things and not injecting woke social ideals and socialism into, sorry, I guess I should have clicked that a little faster.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, so my lovely staff, who some of you probably have met, Molly and met Brittany, put together a little presentation based on some of the things that we did that we thought that y'all as a group would particularly find interesting, or might be like, well, what did you do on that? So I hope you see some things there that were important, because every bullet point there has some victories on it. Okay, so let's talk about constitutional liberties, some bills of note. How many of you knew that until House Bill 2545, that genetic data testing companies could take your information and pass it to a third party or access it in ways? Did you know about that? Okay, some of you did. Well, now we've not only said that they have to be accountable for how they secure the data, but they can't share it with a governmental entity unless a warrant is issued. There have been situations where somebody's been basically accused of a crime based on, you know, some 23andMe thing that they did, you know, because of something that a relative did or something like that. So it's very, very scary stuff. So did that. We also, something that really gets under my skin is credit card companies and woke big banks, woke corporate America, and by that I mean Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo, all the big guys. doing everything humanly possible short of boycotting them altogether to discourage gun dealers, gun store owners, gun manufacturers from being able to access capital, from being able to access the ability to even function as a merchant. And one of the things that they've enjoyed doing is requiring a firearm-specific merchant category code so that they can keep better track of who's buying guns, who's selling guns, and hopefully with the intent of, in the future, preventing us from being able to use a credit card to purchase guns altogether. So we prohibited that. Do you want to talk about school funding? We're still working on that.
Yeah.
Let's not. That's a lot of words.
Yeah.
Let's talk about school safety. You know, one of the things that shocked me, because I was in the legislature in 2019, after the tragedy that we had in Santa Fe, we passed a very comprehensive school safety plan that every school district was supposed to implement. And one of the things that we found out after Uvalde is that a lot of school districts weren't doing it. You know, we actually in 2019 made it was not lawful for exterior doors to not be secure. It was not lawful for classroom doors not to be locked during classroom hours. And those two things specifically were things that were found to be deficient in the Uvalde shooting. And so one of the things that we did this session was to enhance the school safety code even further, and furthermore, it makes certain requirements in the budget as far as increased funding. You know, school districts were looking forward to getting some increased money, and that's in the budget, and that's part of the special session conversation that we'll have later, but there's language in there that basically says that you can't spend the money on textbooks, you can't spend the money on raises, you can't spend the money on anything other than, first of all, you have to prove that you're in compliance with the school safety code and that you've done all the things, you've hardened all those schools like you were supposed to have done in 2019. It was very frustrating for those of us that were there. They were like, all right, yes, we can honestly say we've done a good job and hopefully, God willing, but this should not ever happen again. And then come to find out, not only did it happen again, but it happened again, at least in part, because the 2019 law wasn't even being followed. And then a little bill out of the Houston area by a lawmaker from Cypress that you might know actually authorized. How many of you are familiar with the incident in Nashville, the shooting in Nashville? Did you hear about that? That happened during session. So somebody had an idea to file a bill that basically authorized private schools to commission their own police officers. Did you know that it took 11 minutes from the time that the transgender shooter walked into that private Christian school and opened fire before police arrived on the scene? 11 life-ending minutes. I think private schools should have access to the same safety resources as public schools, should they not? Especially if they're willing to pay for them themselves. So House Bill 4372 basically allows a private school, as long as it meets a certain size requirement. We didn't want to put a burden on a school of 30 people, 30 kids, that they have to have 3 police officers. But for larger schools, if they want to, they now can license their own police officers. I think for your area, the school that you will definitely see that implemented is probably the Second Baptist School up there at the Cypress campus and their main campus down in Woodway. Man, sorry, I really suck at this. Oh, there, all right. All right, let's talk about a little bit of education reform. Okay, so one of the things that I remember hearing a lot when I campaigned the first time, as I knocked on doors, was from our retired teachers that they had not had a raise in, we didn't even know, probably not in the century, right? I think it was in the last century, the last time they had a cost of living increase. And you may recall that last time we had some little money left over, so we gave them, a 13th check. A lot of us were not satisfied with that. A lot of us had campaigned on and had promised a true cost of living increase. And so the problem is that like when I came into office, the teacher's pension fund was not actuarially sound. So if you gave a cost of living increase, it would just destroy the financial stability of the fund. So we had to get the pension to a sound financial place first, and then we could talk about a COLA, which actually we were able to do in the last couple of years. And so very proud to say that with some of the extra revenue that we had available this time, that these retired teachers were finally able to get the first cost of living increase, I think, in this century. And I think that's a big deal. You will still get to vote on that, of course, because HJR2 requires you to vote in November as to whether you actually want them to have a cost of living increase. I'll be voting yes. Another bill that I filed, I'm very proud of. A lot of you in the room, I see a lot of friends in the room that have worked on the National Motto Project, where we've gone and donated signs to our public schools. One of the things that we heard from some of the groups that were working with us on this is, occasionally teachers come to us and they say, well, I'd like to have a copy for my classroom, but the school says I can't, or the principal says I can't, or the school district has a policy that says, no signs of any kind, whatever. So I made it now state law that no school district, no principal, no superintendent can have a policy that prohibits a teacher from proudly displaying "In God We Trust" in their classrooms. Total option to them. But I think it's important. I think it's time God get back in the classroom.
Amen. Amen.
I thought it was really funny when we passed the bill last time where we sort of, the initial one we put in the classrooms, the left-leaning media, they were just sure that if they reached out to the Muslim community, that the Muslim community would say, oh, we hate this. It's a terrible idea. So they reached out to CARE, Council on American Islamic, not exactly a conservative organization, right? I think they may have actually endorsed Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, so not right of center by any means. And so they asked me, so what do you think of this horrible idea these Republicans in Texas have? And they're like, oh, we like it. It's religious freedom. And we hope it actually stimulates a bigger conversation about God. And they were just like, what?
Yay.
They didn't know they were supposed to say that. All right, and I mentioned today, actually, I was in Austin, had the privilege of being present for the signing of Senate Bill 15, which prohibits men from competing against women in college athletics in the state of Texas. And so that is done. My colleague Valerie Swanson has been a tireless fighter on that for 2 sessions. As you know, we did K through 12 last time. Well, now it's collegiate level. As I was telling a couple of folks in here earlier, I was visiting with a state senator from Idaho who was here, who had actually kind of coached and helped and made sure that Representative Swanson had all the information she needed. And she said that there are now enough states in America that have passed this law that the NCAA, most of the major conferences are entirely covered by at least one state that prohibits transgender athletes from competing against girls. So hopefully that's done and it won't be coming back. One more thing we worked on education reform had to do with DEI. How many of you have heard of that? Yeah, that's we have all these acronyms now, right? ESG, CRT, DEI. Well, DEI is dead now in higher education in Texas. It is prohibited. In the same specs as we prohibited CRT in our public schools last session, DEI is no longer welcome in our public universities in Texas. And so very, very good achievement to get rid of that. As you've probably heard me say before, one of the biggest problems I think we have in public education is that a lot of the teachers are being taught in colleges these very far leftist, extremist positions. America's no good, America is fundamentally racist, the whole thing has to be torn down and destroyed. And so we wanted to push back against that. We wanted DEI out of our college classrooms, and so it's gone. And with that, we actually did tenure reform as well.
Is there a penalty for that if they?
Ooh, that's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that, but if you let me, give me a few minutes after I stop talking, I'll look it up for you and I'll tell you. I actually gotta go back to the bill and figure out what the penalty is for that. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Okay, we did a fair, how many social conservatives do we have in here? Would you define yourself as a social conservative? All right, me too. This was a great session for social conservatives. I've talked about SB 14, which was like the story of my life this session, literally. But we didn't stop there. There was more. We actually passed a bill, SB 12, which basically ends the whole drag queen story time children going to sexually oriented businesses because it's, quote, all ages friendly and stuff like that. I'll tell you one of the most fascinating things about this conversation, and I'm sure some of you were actually at the hearing and probably heard this, is that even the sexually oriented businesses that have the drag review thing, you know, like the business owners came and testified in support of this bill. And I remember one guy saying, look, I own one of these businesses. This is adult entertainment.
Exactly.
I mean, you don't take your kids to the strip club. Why on earth would you as a parent feel compelled to bring your kid to my club? That's just wrong. It makes me uncomfortable, and you shouldn't do that. So it was amazing to hear the Democrats argue against this bill. It was just like, it just made them look like a bunch of groomers, honestly.
Yep.
And it was pretty bizarre. It was almost as funny, I don't know how many of you saw this, but when Valerie Swanson was doing the women's sports bill, Chairman Jeff Leach went to the back mic on one of the Democrats who was talking against the bill, and he asked them to say, like, so father to father, you have a daughter, I have a daughter, what should I say to my daughter when she loses her position, she loses that scholarship, she's no longer on the team, because there's a man who's dressed like a woman, who's stronger, faster, more physically capable, who's now taken that opportunity from her permanently. And he's like, well, so he says, well, okay, let me ask the same question another way, Representative. What is a woman? And the guy literally says, this is Representative Busey out of the Austin area. He goes, well, I trust that if someone tells me they're a woman, that they're a woman. That was his definition of woman. And so then Representative Toad comes up and he goes, is it possible for you to define woman without using the word woman? And he couldn't answer the question. So, I mean, they just look so stupid on these bills. It's quite funny. Loved it. Okay, how many of you heard about the Reader Act? So I filed a bill, but there was an even better bill that was filed by my colleague Jared Patterson, who worked very, very hard throughout the entirety of the interim fighting against sexually explicit books and sexually explicit material in our public school libraries. And so we passed legislation that basically removes that content entirely. It provides a rating system. The rating system has to be applied by the publisher. It has an accountability mechanism. It's publicly available. So even if the book's not available in your school, you can actually find out what the rating on the book is. The beauty of that is that once this is up and running in Texas, you could be anywhere in the United States and you can see how the book is rated in Texas, so that every parent everywhere now knows, whether just looking at the catalog, whether there are titles in the school library that shouldn't be there. It was shocking to me to hear from some of our local superintendent type folks that they've gotten into wars with Scholastic about books being given to them for free, sort of slipped in the package at the book fair that they did not ask for, did not want, and Scholastic would not take back. There were some of these titles. So there was definitely some groomer behavior going on the level of these publishers and stuff like that. And it's also interesting to me that a lot of these books, when you look at them, some of these really explicit books, like the Bluest, I think it's called The Bluest Eye, which graphically depicts the rape of a 12-year-old girl by a father. It wins an award for children's literature. I mean, my goodness. I remember when I was a kid, it was Bridge to Terabithia, and, we were reading Huckleberry Finn, and we were reading, Lewis Carroll and Lloyd Alexander, and now it's this kind of stuff. And that's how they get it in. So we've now labeled it all. It will all be publicly available. And so for those of you that are involved, particularly with Cypher ISD or Klein or the others, and you're passionate about this issue, we have now armed you with ironclad proof and evidence
Amen.
that this is not an appropriate book for the classroom. You don't have to read the whole book to figure it out anymore. And if they don't do it, by the way, then as Representative Patterson says, they suffer the death penalty. They're no longer able to say it. Election integrity. Who cares about election integrity here?
Don't worry about it.
There's always, I'm going to preface this part by just saying there's always more work to be done, and this is one of those subjects where no matter how hard we work on it, we never get everything across the finish line that we come to the table thinking we're going to get done. There's too many disagreements between the two chambers, there's too many maneuverings, there's just not enough time, and these issues, They're hard. They really are hard. I think elections is probably the hardest committee to serve on. It is hyper technical. A lot of times it's like a Jenga puzzle. Unless you've been an election judge for many, many years as a lawmaker, you just may not know like the unintended consequences of what you think is actually going to solve the problem. But we did increase the criminal penalty for illegal voting. We made it back into a felony. So that was something that we didn't get right last time. We went back. That was one of the first election integrity bills we passed this session, is we increased the criminal penalty for voting illegally. We also got us out of the, is it Eric? Yeah. Okay, so we are now out of Eric. Texas is no longer in that. So for those of you that were worried that that system was corrupt and was not serving its intended purpose, and it was actually a hindrance rather than a help, don't have to worry about it anymore, it's gone. So Senator Bencourt was very busy this session on election integrity. These last two are definitely his. The first one, 1750, was sponsored by Briscoe Kane, eliminates the EA in a county of more than 3.5 million people. What county do you suppose qualifies for that? Harris.
Lady Hidalgo.
Lena Hidalgo, Bobby Ellis. No more EA in Texas. Now it has to go back to an elected official. It's either going to go back to the clerk or to the tax assessor collector. And boy, you got to know that they're angry about that. In fact, they've already sued us over it. But that's okay. That's fine. I just like to see her get really, really angry. Did you see her drop the F-bomb? Wow. I love it when she gets that angry. I try to file bills all the time to make her really, really angry. I actually filed a bill, it's not in here because it didn't pass, but I actually filed a bill that Rodney Ellis hated so much that he actually had a proclamation at Commissioner's Court this session condemning me, condemning my Senate sponsor, Charles Perry, and condemning the legislation. And what it did is it eliminated mandatory contracting in Medicaid, where a hospital that owns a health plan, like the one down there, no matter how crappy they are, they're guaranteed a contract because they're affiliated with a public hospital. And he hated that bill so much that I can now officially say that I have been condemned by Commissioner's Court, which kind of makes me happy. I thought it was sort of funny. I got a call one night from Commissioner Ramsey. He goes, "Hey, what is this bill, HB 2401? And I was like, "Oh, it's my mandatory contracting bill." Why? And he goes, "Well, because Rodney's going to condemn you tomorrow in court over it." He's like, "I want to know what it is." So I told him. He's like, "Oh, that's terrible." Anyway, that was good. Senate Bill 1933. This was an issue, some of you remember when I left in January, I was very passionate about one election integrity issue in particular, and that was if the county can't get it right, the state should come in and take over. Enough with the corrupt local elections. If you really want us to, we'll swing enough big enough hammer that if you can't do it honestly, we'll replace you with someone who can. So that's what Senate Bill 1933 essentially does. It gives the Secretary of State broad oversight powers. As soon as the Secretary of State receives a complaint about irregularities, it doesn't have to be fraud, it could just be incompetence. It could be something as simple as, I don't know, failure to deliver appropriate number of ballots to a polling location. That would qualify. The Secretary of State has the ability to enter into what's called oversight, where they send people into the election department and they're granted access to everything and all things, and essentially get to see, go, do whatever they want. They also have to write a quarterly report about everything they've seen and heard. And then on top of that, the Secretary of State has the authority under this law to remove an election administrator, or in the case if it were an elected official, which it will be going forward, to petition through a court process to have that election official terminated from their elected office for failure to follow law. So I think that's a pretty big hammer. Honestly, that's the one that really scared them. That was the one that they were up at the last minute screaming and yelling and carrying on and saying, "We can't let this bill pass. We'll be sunk if this passes. The game's up." And so we hope it is. I also named that legislation posthumously in honor of one of our fallen friends. It is actually referred to now officially as the Alan Vera Election Integrity Act of 2023. So, Alan is still with us. Okay, border security. Man, if this wasn't sort of a bit of a disappointment. We started off with so many really good bills, and this was one of those where the process really got in the way. However, I will say that we did a few small things, and then Governor Abbott has graciously put a border security on the call for special session, so we continue to do more work on this issue. But these are just some things that we did. They're not the thing that I was excited about, which was the border integrity unit, where you would actually have trained volunteers actually augmenting DPS and our Texas Guard forces to be able to help enforce the law at the border. Interesting side note, there was legislation this session that would have made it, would have put a constitutional amendment up for the voters to decide that made it a criminal act to vote if you're not a citizen of the state of Texas. And did you know that every single Democrat chickened out and voted present to prevent us from getting to 100 votes, which was necessary for that to pass? It was the biggest cop-out chicken fest I have ever seen in the legislature. They knew they couldn't vote against it, because then they're basically saying, no, we think it's cool for people who are here illegally to vote in our elections, right? But they couldn't vote for it because they know that it'd be disenfranchising some of their own voters, probably. And so they just decided to stay present so that we couldn't pass it. If that's not a slap in the face, but I think it tells you a lot about where their heart is.
Yeah.
So if any of you ever are thinking, like, are they really willing to go to any lengths to win? The answer is absolutely. Absolutely. All right, let's see. Okay, tax relief. We did do a couple of cool tax relief things. The first one was the one I was really excited about. The second one, it's okay, but it's a sales tax exemption. But the first one I thought was pretty exciting. How many of you know about the wealth tax? Have you heard of that? It's been bandied about at the federal level and by liberal states like California and stuff like that, where they want to have if you make more than a certain amount of money, or if you have certain net worth, basically, you get to pay a separate extra special tax on top of the massive 50% of the entire federal budget that you're already paying for in your massively regressive federal income tax scheme. And so we actually will have a chance to vote this fall on whether we want to amend the Constitution to prohibit the state from ever imposing a wealth tax, which I sincerely hope we do, because I can't think of anything more un-American than punishing success.
That's criminal.
That is just unbelievable. The family care item thing, Senate bill, the only thing I'm going to say about this, you're not going to pay sales tax on these items anymore. So that's the good news. The bad news is we've added another exemption to sales tax. And as you've heard me say over and over and over again, if we just eliminated half of the existing exemptions, we could wipe out school M&O and have it completely paid for. So just every time we add another one of these exemptions, it's great when you need to buy breast milk pumping products and baby bottles, and those are things people need. Those are things young families need. But on the other hand, that just puts us one step further away from having a sales tax base that's broad enough. I'm not talking about increasing rates, mind you. I'm just talking about a bigger base of sales tax payment that would actually could actually wipe out half of our property taxes. So, I love this bill. Oh, this is one of my favorite bills of the session. Rogue district attorneys in Texas. Does anybody know of one around here that can be classified as rogue? And by that I mean somebody who basically says, graffiti on people's private property really isn't a criminal act. Well, okay, it may be a criminal act, but I don't think it's worthy of prosecution. So as a policy, I'm not going to prosecute anyone who is accused of graffiti, or accused of selling drugs, or accused of stealing catalytic converters, or accused of breaking and entering. Because I'm focused on these crimes over here, or voter fraud. So now, if the district attorney, if there's evidence presented that the district attorney has a policy, either because they've informed their subordinates, we don't accept charges against anybody doing that, or if they're stupid enough to publicly say, well, I'm not prosecuting anybody for violating a law banning abortion, now they can be removed from office immediately. Well, there's a process, but they can be removed from office. So that will help get rid of some of the George Soros mediated wokeisms that we're seeing in the district attorney's offices. I think that was a much needed thing, and I think Representative Cook did a really good job on that. It's now includes all the things as official misconduct. Okay, a little bit of healthcare stuff. I'm going to skip down to the last one, although I think HB 202 is cool, but I can explain that too if you're really interested. Do that later, don't take too much time. We had one bill down there, Senate Bill 29, addressing the whole mask mandate, vaccine mandate thing. So this is not private businesses, but government entities, school districts, courthouses, city halls, public venues can no longer have these policies in place to force you to do something. So that was taken care of. And then on top of that, one that's not up here, House Bill 44, Representative Swanson's bill, actually prohibits a pediatrician from discriminating against a Medicaid beneficiary because they aren't up to date on their vaccination status. Because we were having a real problem with situations where pediatricians would tell the parents, unless you're going to get your kid fully immunized today, Howard, I'm firing your kid from my practice because we don't want your kind around here, you anti-vaxxer people.
Right.
And so now that's basically, if they do that, they're gone. They actually lose their ability to take care of Medicaid patients altogether. So they're gone. I think that's sending a very positive message. Okay, we have a special session. I'm sure you've heard of it. Some of the things we didn't get worked out. There were a few things, but for the first special session, the governor wanted us to work on border security, and he wanted us to work on property taxes. We're still working on those things, but we have good proposals. I was really, really happy. For those of you that have heard me talk about property taxes, you know that I have been a huge proponent of compression as a means to eliminate maintenance and operations. I am a diehard. I'm committed to that process. That is what I want to do. The only logical way to get rid of local property tax from the school district is for the state to shoulder the burden. It's a dollar for dollar swap. The state has to step up, and then at that point you basically have to prohibit the school district from raising the taxes to backfill. We call that compression, and so the governor has said that's what he wants to see, and I'm all in on that. It's not a quick process. You don't do it overnight. But it's one of those things, kind of like I like to think of it as the Dave Ramsey version of dealing with property taxes. You know, he likes to talk about the debt snowball and how you chip away at it, right? So if we were to increase the state's portion that it was paying over time based on surplus revenue that we had available, assuming that over any reasonable period of time, yeah, you might have a downturn in the market, but the reality is the Texas economy continues to grow, that you would get to a point to where you could actually completely wipe out at least 40% of the property tax burden you currently pay, which is maintenance and operations in public schools. So I am all for that. I know that the Senate is working very hard on the homestead exemption as another means of providing property tax relief. I think they're different strategies, but they will both deliver property tax relief. It is not necessarily my fight that I'm willing to pick, but I voted for both in the regular session, and I got to tell you, I'm super excited to hear Governor Abbott talk about compression, because to me, that is where it's at. Everything else is just kind of like, yeah, that's good, but what we really want to do is eliminate, and the only way to eliminate is through compression. It's only means we have of replacing. So So I'm all for that. I'm happy to take any questions you have, and just thank you for the opportunity to be here.
What,
Sir.
one quick one,
Of course.
the EA, when does that go into effect?
Ooh, Uncle Paul, do you know when that goes into effect?
Yeah, I can talk about it.
Okay, he's gonna talk about it. Those two bills are actually both his bills.
Okay.
So I was honored to be able to carry 1933 in the House. I think that's the one that really kicks their teeth in. And I'm so excited about it. I'm so happy to see this already.
So Tom, would you be okay to
Yeah.
give Uncle Paul some time, and then you guys can maybe jointly answer some questions from both chambers? Is that okay?
I'm typing something to Chairman Huffman, it's important. Don't
Uh,
let that time.
All right, some more questions for Tom while Paul figures out his text. Other questions? How about choice? How about school choice, Tom?
How about school choice? I'm all for it. And honestly, I think, and this actually may have worked out in a way that, at least in my calculations, is reasonably favorable. Because Senator Creighton did a really smart thing. He took hold of Ken King's bill, who is a rabid anti-school choice person from North Texas, and he stuffed educational savings accounts into it. But what the bill did is it basically provided the directions for how the increase in public school monies was going to be spent. So without that enabling legislation, you just have money set aside for public schools, but no ability to actually parse it out. And so now we have a golden opportunity where essentially the governor can just look them in the eye and just say, ain't signing one without signing the others. And they'll figure out how to get it all into one bill. That's what I'm hoping for, because I think that's the way to have the conversation. I've heard that conversation may not happen until the fall. But I don't know about that, because the issue for the school districts, of course, is going to be that they all set their budgets in July. So if we don't increase their funding and tell them the money's on its way before the end of July, then it ain't going to get there in time for raises and capital equipment and all that stuff. So it's almost like we're just delaying it for an entire year. But on the other hand, you don't want to have every teachers union in Texas up there screaming and yelling. Although I'm okay with that, because I'm quite used to that by now. When we got done with the gender mod bill at midnight in the House, they had thought they were going to intimidate us by having a whole bunch of people sign up to basically say the same thing over and over and over again. But Stephanie Click was too smart for that. And so when she's like, okay, that's it. You know, I said at the beginning of the day, we're not going to let this run into the next business day. The day is over. We're done. They all went outside screaming and yelling, and then all laid down on the floor like cordwood and tried to block us and prevent us from actually leaving the hearing room. That's how crazy they are. So I'm used to that, and at this point I'm kind of like, yeah, bring it on, baby.
In reference to, I think it was House Bill 18,
Yes, sir.
what possible argument would the Democrats put up against that?
Which one was that? Are you talking about the one that?
Want to keep them away from sexual exploitation?
So are you talking about the one that deals with online stuff, or are you talking about the drag queen stuff? The 18 is more of the online stuff. That one actually went pretty easily. There wasn't a whole lot of arguments over that one. It wasn't until we got to my bill, Senator Campbell's bill, SB 14, that the gloves came off and the teeth came out, and then everything after that was an absolute knockdown, drag-out fight. We got the ESG bill done 2 minutes before the deadline, 2 minutes before midnight, because Representative Kane and I went to the speaker and we were just like, we can't let this bill die. And he's like, what does it do? I tell him, he goes, I'm all for it. What do you want to do? And I said, we want to call the question. And Briscoe's like, I got 25 signatures right here. And he goes, let's do it. I'm all in. So he gavels and basically shut off debate and called the question. And you could have just seen the steam coming out of the Democrats' ears, because they had literally just been outflanked on that and defeated. It was awesome.
Other questions?
Hey, Lexi, yeah.
Okay, I read some of this, but I didn't quite understand, so maybe you can explain. What's gonna happen on Sunday when Abbott may not sign many bills, and are they automatically vetoed, or if he doesn't sign them, do they just pass without his signature, and what's all gonna take place?
I have no idea, but I will tell you that today Uncle Paul and I had a bill that got vetoed together. Fortunately, we usually carry bills together that he can't afford to veto, like election integrity bills. But we had a bill that he vetoed, and then basically what he's been saying is, I'm gonna veto this bill, and when you all come to your senses and pass property tax reform, then I'm happy to add it back on the call, and you can do it this summer.
Tom, tell
So
me
it's sort of like, I'm gonna kill you, but then I'm gonna give you a chance to be resurrected after you do what I told you to do.
Tom, tell them what that was, because it was a really good bill.
It was a really good bill. How many of you know Brad Birdwell? He's lives out here, constituent. So he has a contracting business, and so what the bill does, because this is a real problem for contractors, is let's say you did some work on a building and the construction company's out of state, and so the contract that you signed says that if they don't pay you, in order for you to get a judgment against them to get paid, you have to go to the state of New York and sue them there. So what the bill does is it basically says, if the work's done in Texas by a Texas contractor, the only venue is here in Texas. No more traveling out of state to get paid. Right. So I called his office today, the governor's office, and he said, well, as soon as you guys come to your senses, I will gladly put that bill in the call and you can pass it again. I'm like, yeah, more work.
So does that mean for like dozens of these bills that he might veto? I mean, is he like really bored and wants to have special session after special session because you have to have a hearing again and don't you have to go through everything to pass the bill again?
You do, and so you wouldn't want to do that to a bill that was extremely controversial, that is likely to be a knockdown, drag-out fight, right? But if it's an important local bill, and this is a great example of an important bill brought by a constituent, it has statewide implications, but it was something that nobody really was thinking about, and then everyone said, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. We should do that. You know, kind of like the bill that we passed where we got rid of the vehicle inspection stupidity. That you don't have to go get a vehicle inspection and then get ripped off by the guy who wants to upcharge you for brand new wiper blades and refuses to pass your vehicle until you buy his wiper blades. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but I have. So that was one of my favorite things. But so I think ultimately, whatever he decides to do, he's basically trying to exert the pressure that he has available as the governor to try to force the House and Senate to come to an agreement on the property taxes. And I'm just gonna tell you, and I'm not trying to dodge it, but honestly, I don't get to work on these bills. I filed a property tax bill, same one I filed for 3 sessions now. It didn't get a hearing. So I'm gonna leave that up to the tax man, because I know he knows what's going on with that, and I don't.
Okay, you want me or who wants me?